My name is Tareq Emtairah. I will be your moderator, and I'm dialing in from a very chilly, extremely gloomy Nairobi here in Kenya. As we wait for more people to join in, please feel free to get to know one another in the chat box and let us know who you are, where you're from, how the weather is like over there. And also, I need to mention that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available afterwards. So again, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on Youth in Energy, a catalyst for climate action. This will be the second of 5 webinars on empowering youth for COP27, and all 5 webinars have the common goal to provide the engagement and a capacity building platform for young people to tackle key topics in a bid to raise climate change awareness and identify the gaps and the challenges that come along with it and fuel the interaction of young people at COP27. We are very pleased to be hosting a resourceful panel who will be diving deep in matters ranging from energy and climate change nexus, the role of renewables in the climate policy making processes, and will cover the cross-cutting themes of gender and youth towards a sustainable transition. After which we will have an interactive Q&A session towards the end of our program. So without further ado, I would like to invite Helen Watts, the Senior Director of Global Partnerships from Student Energy, to present the opening remarks. Helen manages Student Energy's global fund development and designs youth-inclusive programs, including the Global Youth Energy Outlook, the Greenpreneurs Incubator, among others. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you so much, Sharab, and thank you to UNIDO and the SDG7 Youth Constituency and all of the partners and organizers of this event series for gathering us for a really important discussion. I think in the lead up to COP27, the intersection of the clean energy transition within the broader climate agenda is one that is so critical, and bringing youth voices to the forefront of this conversation has never been more important. So as Sharab kindly introduced, my name is Helen Watts. I'm the Senior Director of Student Energy. Student Energy is a global youth-led organization working to accelerate the energy transition by engaging and empowering 50,000 young people from 130 countries around the world. And to set the stage a little bit for the discussion today, I think we're all in agreement, but globally, we've seen that far more needs to be done to close the clean energy access gap and accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels and onto renewable energy sources and clean energy sources. Empowering young people is a critical part of this mission. It's essential to achieving SDG7 and the interconnected development goals, and offers communities really long-lasting solutions and strong community engagement on renewable energy. Young people are inherently primed to build in more community buy-in and more inclusive approaches to deploying clean energy around the world by being so connected to their communities and to one another. An area where young people are quite uniquely poised to accelerate the transition is in the global scale-up of green jobs and the growth of the renewable energy sector. For example, to drive progress on SDG7 over the next 8 years or so, country-led energy compacts at the high-level dialogue on energy in 2021 promised the creation of over 5 million green jobs. And so we've seen with other actors actually committing to a further 250 million green jobs created and enabled over the next 8 years. However, we've seen that 1.8 billion youth around the world still face limited access to educational opportunities, project finance, and decent jobs, as well as vocational skills, particularly those in emerging and developing economies, where access to energy is compounded with additional development challenges and access challenges. So if hundreds of millions of green jobs are to be created in the next 8 years, it is so urgent that young people are trained and supported now to access those opportunities and really accelerate the growth of renewable sectors as they seek opportunities in this workforce. This will support global and local sectors to avoid serious talent shortages and for communities to access inclusive economic growth through the transition. So there's so many different positive impacts that really come from supporting young people to really drive this green jobs revolution that we're anticipating over the next 8 years, and that countries and leaders have committed to creating. Moreover, for young social and commercial energy entrepreneurs, it's estimated that by supporting founding teams with mentorship and startup resources within the first year, we significantly reduce the failure rate of clean energy startups which is a huge opportunity while reducing young people's risk profile for further investment. And overall, you can shave up to a decade off a project's ability to create measurable impacts in their communities. So there's really an untapped opportunity here to support young people with the tools, resources, mentorship networks, and ultimately livelihoods that will really accelerate this transition over the next 8 years. And definitely would emphasize within the next year in particular, especially as we're looking to COP27. So in the lead up to COP27, what I would urge everyone in this space today is to connect with communities of young people attending COP, such as Student Energy, the SDG7 Youth Constituency, Youngo, and others, to really strengthen the voice of young people on clean energy at this pivotal event. Energy can sometimes not get kind of as much of a platform as some other topics, which is reasonable considering the kind of broad scope of climate action, but it really is so critical that we make measurable and significant progress on clean energy in the next several years, in particular when it comes to closing the clean energy access gap, which has so many compounding effects for communities. I also urge you to directly engage with your governments and leaders to urge bolder and youth-inclusive action on clean energy that addresses the unique opportunity for young people to be leaders in their communities, within organizations, and in launching their own solutions. So capacity building mechanisms, financing for youth solutions, and inclusive policy design are all levers that you can advocate for in your own countries and at global spaces like COP27. So I will leave you with this message, and I'm so delighted to provide the opening remarks and set the stage for the discussion today. I look forward to a really engaging and dynamic conversation. Thank you so much, and back to you, Sharab.
Thank you so much, Helen, for setting the stage with your insightful statements, particularly on empowering young people, on accelerating a just energy transition through green jobs and supporting entrepreneurship needs. And I can see you're already introducing yourselves in the chat function, and lots of some questions are streaming in on the Q&A, but we'll address the Q&A towards the end of the agenda, so feel free to drop your questions whenever. I would now like to switch gears and welcome our first panelist, Ndibuho Chikovu. Ndibuho is a research fellow at Durban University of Technology and a student of international energy economics at the University of Leipzig. And he has represented his country, South Africa, in several youth summits, including the G20, the African Union, and Euro-BRICS summits. He will take us through the first part of this webinar on the role that energy plays in the climate action. Welcome, Ndibuho.
Thank you, Sharaf, and thank you for setting the pace, Helen. And I hope everyone can hear and see me. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I'm very excited each and every time when I get these platforms of being, being able to talk to young people, to my peers and all that, towards a common goal. It's always exciting. So without wasting much time, I'll try to share my screen, and then I should be able to start my presentation for the day. So as Sharop has already mentioned, my name is Ndibuho Chikovu, and my presentation today is mainly just to talk about the role of young people in these very important energy and climate action dynamics that we're facing currently. And of course, the whole idea is that we're working towards, COP27, and we need to make sure that the youth are actually taking a lead role in making sure that the climate change or the climate action, as well as energy issues, are actually being taken seriously. Now, I see it in this way, or I think we should all see it in this way. Basically, you can already see that the young people are actually the important, stakeholder when it comes to energy and climate change, because not only are they 1.8 billion young people in the world as we speak today, which is projected to actually, go higher. And in Africa, where I am from, it's actually way more higher in terms of the number of the youth compared to the other, population group. But the important factor here is that at least 65% of them have acknowledged already that climate change is a global emergency. So that's a very good starting point to see that young people have already acknowledged that we need to act right now, right? So it's no longer a question of we need to talk about young people getting into the space of acting or doing something about the energy and climate change mitigation or adaptation. It's how we coordinate the actions now, how we make it work for the global impact, and also be able to make it work so that we can be able to reach the sustainable development goals by 2030. We're almost towards 2030, but we are already, doing something towards that as young people from all corners of the world, obviously. And one interesting fact that the United Nations Development Program has indicated is that the renewable energy jobs actually that can come out of this, energy and climate change, actions are almost 42 million. And the good thing about it is that the people who are likely to be economically active to be able to take up these jobs are actually young people. So that means all the jobs that we will be created by the renewable energies as well as the climate mitigation strategies or actions will be taken up by us who are talking today, those of you who are here today. And that's a very good starting point, right? Because then we can be able to get rid or be able to reach the Sustainable Development Goal, as well as continuing to address some of the Paris Agreement issues. Now, the whole point why we're here is mainly because we have been using fossil fuels for quite some time. And now it's about how can we change those dynamics, not only the generations before us, but also ourselves as young people, right? So that we can have, some sort of a environment where we can live it for other people and be able to have more or less the same benefits or enjoy the environment with all its benefits as we found it. So the whole point here is that, the fossil fuel, of course, you know how it comes about. I don't have to explain to you how that comes about. But then from the Paris Agreement and everything, we have to try and make sure that we reduce the use as well as the impact of the fossil fuels on our climate. So that's the bigger picture. That's the broader picture that we can take in terms of how to act, because we all don't want to be fossil fuels. That's one of the important messages that we have to take forward as this generation of today when it comes to climate change and renewable energy. None of us want to be, fossil fuels. We want to be able to understand the impact that it has had over the years and then come up with remedies or actions in order to avoid the continuation or also try to transition from what the fossil fuels have done to the climate, and then we try to come up with the measures to reduce and also eventually be able to stop completely the usage of fossil fuels for the good of our environment. Now, one of the important or interesting while I was preparing for this, I remembered that in 2020, the International Renewable Energy Agency had a conference actually in Abu Dhabi where they focused on how young people can be innovative. This is where the entrepreneurship activities comes play, and in renewable energies. Also, the main important fact of that, or the outcomes of that, or the today's language of the adaptation and mitigation, very much important on how young people can play their roles in making sure that the adaptation and mitigation strategies are actually, fruitful, are actually doing what we want them to do. Because as much as the pace has been set about what we can do about adaptation and mitigation, the onus is left with us as young people, because we are very much likely to be there in 2030 and 2050 and 2060 as compared to the other generation. I'm not saying anything about the other generation, but I'm just saying we are very much likely to be there to be able to implement these adaptation and mitigation strategies that we have. And then that can, the turnaround of that will go to the socioeconomic benefits and renewable example, in renewable energy. So that's very important that we continue these dialogues and these talks to be able to attain those goals. Now, I mean, of course, again, you all know, or you have heard, the reason you're here is because you're interested in international energy and climate, in general, and you have had, or you've seen some sort of mitigation or adaptation strategies. But what I'm interested in here is that if you look at the middle point between mitigation and adaptation, is that you and I have had somehow a role to play, or we have been influenced by either education, food system, water conservation, communities, new energy system, and urban forest, right? But if you look at that middle point and try to think about it from your daily activities, and how can you play a role in the mitigation and adaptation strategies, that's your personal space that you can try and play a role and be able to contribute in making sure that the mitigation and adaptation strategies are not only at talking points, are actually embedded in your daily activities, so that your carbon footprint can be minimized, and we then have to make sure that we retain or we leave this earth as we found. Now, some of the strategies, I think this was recommended by, this is one thing that I picked up while preparing for this, was that there's so many, ideas and so many strategies. I was attending one session earlier on where one professor was talking about how, as humankind, we are very much good at talking, right? We're talking machine, he said. And now it's about, let's stop this talking machine, because other living beings like animals or whatever, they don't talk as much as we do. So it's like, let's pause a bit and start acting. Let's not talk anymore. And I realized that there was already blueprint on some of the mitigation and adaptation strategies that have already been put in place. And now it's about how can we start, acting on them, rather than having the next discussion point or the next. Of course, dialogues are important, but we can't always be talking about the things. We have to start. It's like, for example, how can we protect the coastal wastelands? How can we promote the benefits of sustainable agroforestry, also decentralize the energy distribution, and secure the indigenous people's land rights, and then improve the mass transport of stuff like goods via cars and all that. Because one of the interesting facts that I learned today was that, in terms of, for example, the carbon emission from the flights and all that, compared to the cars and trucks that are moving goods every day, there's a huge difference, and those are some of the things that we can try to think about when we want to achieve the mitigation and adaptation strategies. And as young people, for sure, one of the sad thing that happens with us is that there's always discussion and there's talks, and I'm happy that we're having this by ourselves and for us, because in most cases we are always the subject that people talk about without really including us. And we need to bridge a gap. You need to have, the bridge, to bridge that gap and be able to be on the other side and be able to influence, what is happening. I mean, one example that I wanted to make is how we as young people are very, influential on social media, for example, because that's what we use almost every day. And if almost every day it's something trending on Twitter, whether in your community or in your country or globally. But it's not trending because the older generation are on Twitter making a trend. Is the power that we have as young people. Now, how can we now make energy and climate trend every day? That's the power we have. Let's make it a point that it trends every day, because that's more important rather than entertainment stories that we make trends in a daily basis. So that's some of the things that we can think about and we can try and influence in our daily space to be able to reach or to realize these mitigation and adaptation strategies as young people. Now, before I conclude, I just wanted to go back to the former president of my country, South Africa, where I'm from, South Africa. He did mention that as people, the most valuable treasure thing that we have, it's actually us human beings, but then the young people themselves are the key in making sure that we have almost everything that we aspire to have. And if they're not included in any process of anything, we basically not going to get far further in anything. So I'm very thankful to those who invited me, and I look forward to engaging with you later. Thank you very much, and I hand back to Cheryl. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dibuho, on highlighting the importance and the potential and opportunities from the renewable energy sector that young people can benefit from. And indeed, let's walk the talk and act on our ambitions. For now, I would like to welcome Tracy Crow, Senior Director and Chief of Staff, Sustainable Energy for All, to present her views from the policymaking angle. Ms. Crow has extensive experience in strategy and business plans, and she manages internal programs of the HR, communications, operations, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So welcome to our session, Ms. Crow. Shall we jump right into it?
Thank you very much. And apologies, I have no presentation, so it's just going to be me providing remarks, but very happy to be participating in this webinar series, and especially want to thank the organizers and the host for the event. Just to make sure everybody knows a little bit about the organization that I come from, Sustainable Energy for All, SE for All for short. We're an international organization that works in partnership with the UN and leaders in government, the private sector, financial institutions, civil society, philanthropies, all working towards faster action to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7. And that's access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement on climate. So in short, we work to ensure a clean energy transition that leaves no one behind and brings new opportunities to everyone to fulfill their potential. So we're here to talk about the role of energy in climate policy. And about the critical role that strong energy transition policy plays on our ability to tackle the climate crisis. So in my remarks, I would like to touch on 4 key points. Number 1, the challenge of achieving universal energy access, SDG 7, alongside the clean energy transition. 2, the role of renewable energy technologies in adaptation and mitigation strategies. 3, the importance of robust and holistic energy policy in addressing climate change. And 4th, the critical role of women and youth in achieving our energy access and energy transition goals. So first, the challenge of balancing energy access and the clean energy transition. So the energy sector has a major impact on climate. It accounts for roughly 2/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. And these emissions, as we know, must be reduced dramatically to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And this can only be achieved by phasing out fossil fuels and scaling up the use of renewable energy technologies and pursuing energy efficiency. But to talk about energy transitions, we must first talk about energy access. And I heard Helen mention this in her opening remarks, and I was very glad to hear her mention it. So I think this is something that is being elevated, and this is something that we at SE for All are really focused on elevating. And simply put, we cannot achieve net zero emissions by 2050 without first achieving energy access for all with clean and affordable energy, electricity, and clean cooking by 2030. So access to clean and modern energy for all is the prerequisite for economic growth, employment, for poverty reduction, for quality education and healthcare. Access to energy really does underpin basically all of the other sustainable development goals. So when we talk about achieving SDG 7 by 2030, I think in our view, we actually need to achieve SDG 7 much earlier so that it can enable the other SDGs to be achieved. Now, unfortunately, according to the latest SDG 7 tracking report that was released in June, we still have 733 million people around the world who lack access to even basic levels of electricity. And there are 2.4 billion people, that's almost 1/3 of the global population, who don't have access to clean cooking solutions. To complicate this challenge even further, SDG 7 calls for universal access to modern energy for all by 2030. So modern, at least in our view, and I hope everyone's view, it should mean more than just enough electricity to power a light bulb or charge a phone. And unfortunately, according to definitions from some organizations, and actually what the SDG 7 tracking report measures, modern energy access is achieved once an individual's household annual electricity consumption reaches 50 kilowatt hours per capita in rural areas and 100 kilowatt hours in urban areas. So for context, 50 kilowatt hours is about half the electricity supply needed to run a single modern energy efficient refrigerator for 1 year. So can we really consider 50 or 100 kilowatt hours modern? In comparison, the median annual electricity consumption for high income countries is over 6,700 kilowatt hours per capita. And according to research by Energy for Growth, there are no high income countries today with annual electricity consumption below 3,000 kilowatt hours per capita. So to talk about a just and equitable energy transition, the scope and definition of energy access must grow, and it must be powered by clean and renewable energy sources. If we adjust the definition of modern energy to be at least 1,000 kilowatt hours per capita, the growth in energy demand by 2030 will be significantly higher than projected. So here's the challenge. How do we balance ensuring everyone has access to sufficient modern energy by 2030 and meeting the anticipated significant growth in energy demand with the energy transition that is so critical if we are to achieve net zero emissions and mitigate further climate change? So let's briefly look at the role of renewable energy technologies in climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. So as mentioned earlier, due to the energy sector's major contribution to global emissions, the phase out of fossil fuels and a corresponding rapid scale up of renewable energy technologies is critical to meeting Paris Agreement targets and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. But we must also take into consideration the countries and regions that are already affected by the climate crisis and for whom adaptation is priority. So every year, vital energy infrastructure is damaged or destroyed by storms, floods, fires, and other extreme weather events that are increasing in frequency due to climate change. In some places, these events are resulting in a reversal of energy access. And this is in addition to the impact of the COVID epidemic, with an estimated 90 million people in Asia and Africa who previously had gained access to electricity who are no longer able to afford it. So this adds even further complexity to the challenge of achieving SDG 7 and by extension, all other SDGs. So as such, adapting the existing energy infrastructure in these regions to be more climate resilient is a priority. In addition, new installations of renewable energy technologies and infrastructure must also consider this physical climate risk and be designed and constructed to withstand possible extreme weather events. Moving on to the third point, the importance of robust energy policy in addressing the climate crisis. So the energy transition will look different for different countries. There is no one overall energy transition. It has to come down to that individual country and what that individual country's priorities and needs are. It's particularly going to be different for developing and emerging economies. So countries will need to develop evidence-based energy transition plans that show the specific projects and policies that will help them achieve SDG 7 by 2030, net zero by 2050, and industrialization along the way. So for us, it has to be energy access, climate, and development all together and not separately. Strong energy policies should ideally be founded upon a clear understanding of what a country's specific energy transition could look like, while also considering what is needed to close the critical electricity access and clean cooking gaps that constrain the development of all other sectors. So once this policy foundation is established, we can support countries in making clear business cases or plans for why an investment in renewable energy is better than one in fossil fuels. Now, these plans must be based on data and evidence on the ground, and ideally form a pipeline of bankable projects and policies that government, financiers, and partners can all rally around in each country to drive faster progress towards our energy, climate, and development goals. Just as an aside, the government of Nigeria just yesterday publicly launched its energy transition plan, the first country in Africa to do this. And this was done with SE4All's support. So I do encourage you to look for that. There should be lots of news online about that. Countries that have the energy transition plans need financial support. They need financial support to enable the development of these energy transition plans. And significantly, they need scaled up investment to implement these plans over the coming years. So for Nigeria, as one example, they're going to need something like $410 billion above business as usual to implement their energy transition plan. So significant funds that are going to be needed for this. Finally, I would like to speak about the critical role of youth and women. We need bold, urgent action to secure a clean energy transition that leaves no one behind as we work to achieve our Paris Agreement goals. This is a critically important time for the energy sector, and it's also a moment when we need the talent, innovation, and enthusiasm of young leaders. And we cannot hope to meet our goals without women's professional contribution to the energy transition. We've seen the incredible drive of women and young energy leaders from across the world, and the passion and expertise that they possess, that you possess, to help secure a clean energy future and create the opportunities you deserve. At SE4All, we believe that women and youth should be recognized as change makers, as leaders, disruptors, and trailblazers. Young leaders around the world are demonstrating the innovation, drive, and creativity needed to achieve SDG 7 and a just and equitable energy transition through impressive projects that are closing energy access gaps in their communities. At SE4All, we put gender equality at the heart of our work. Our Women and Youth at the Forefront program supports and champions the next generation of energy leaders to close the access gap and ensure that no one is left behind in the energy transition. And we'll continue to find ways to empower them through technical training, mentorship, internship, and sponsorship opportunities. So we want women and youth to use their immense potential to create a cleaner and more equitable energy sector for all. Now, in this critical year for accelerating progress, we need that passion and leadership more than ever. We really need you to be bold. And we know that today's decisions will impact tomorrow's ability to recover better, to achieve SDG 7 by 2030, and a clean energy transition by 2050. So now is the time to invest in a sustainable energy future for all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Crow, for putting into context the importance of achieving universal access and the critical role robust policies for just and equitable transition. It's now the time to remind you that we are halfway through with the panel, and please feel free to put in the Q&A, your questions in the Q&A chat function. So we shall swiftly move to matters decarbonization and would now like to welcome Rana Ghonim, Chief Energy Systems and Decarbonization Unit at UNIDO. Rana has spearheaded the development of sustainable energy programs and has contributed to the development and implementation of key multilateral agreements. Welcome, Rana.
Thank you, Tareq, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers, including my own amazing team, Katarina and Anna, who have been putting quite a lot of support to actually put together this series. Very excited to be with you and to see the number of youth from around the world that are joining us today and that are interested in climate change and topics related to decarbonization. I'd like to start by perhaps setting the scene in terms of why do we talk about industry and climate change. So industry is actually impacted by climate change, is a reason for climate change, is also a provider of solutions for climate change. So we like to refer to it as industry has these three faces of being the bad guy, the victim, as well as the hero that we need to actually deliver on new climate change solutions. So in terms of why is industry the bad guy, it's basically, if we look at the emissions that industry is responsible for, industry is responsible for 1/3 of the global greenhouse gas emissions and 1/3 of the global energy demand. And this is actually a fast growing sector. So many countries are still working on industrializing, and as such, you know, these impacts are only expected to increase, and that increase is primarily going to come from developing and emerging economies. So when we look at industry, then we need to look at ways to decouple that growth and also the existing industrialization from greenhouse gas emissions and negative impacts. The second way is, why is it a vulnerable sector? Well, simply, you know, there's a lot of industries that are let's look, for example, at the agribusiness industries. You know, agribusinesses depend on products, and then look into conserving these. You know, with climate change, a lot of crops are being affected, and so there will be also some impacts in terms of the supply of certain inputs for industry. At the same time, industry uses resources such as water, and again, with climate change and impacts on water scarcity, we really see that you know, industry is a vulnerable sector, and we need to work on more measures to help industry in adapting to these. Because at the end of the day, and I like to just say, you know, industry is this pen I'm writing with, is this earphones I'm listening with, is the you know, product that we just ate over lunch. So that is really how industry interlinks with everything that we are doing in our day-to-day life. And finally, on this solutions provider, I know that we will be actually having in the next webinar next week more emphasis on the role of industry as a provider of new clean tech innovations. But I'd like to elaborate a bit on also the role of industries and large corporates in making commitments on climate actions and promoting better consumer behavior. Because while industry is responsible, we also as consumers are responsible to make choices that influence industry and not only allow them, but demand them to really integrate sustainability into their practices. So that's the scene of why industry is relevant in this discussion that we are talking about. And what I would like to now shift to is what are some of the opportunities and challenges that we see in industry, and how do we help actually put industry on the right track towards achieving climate neutrality and net zero goals by 2050. First, if we look, I mean, I mentioned industry accounts for 1/3 of the global energy demand, but in fact, to reduce that demand, we can achieve that significantly by introducing energy efficiency. So simply using the energy that is already put in industry in a more efficient way. And that can actually reduce almost 50% of the emissions that are required for us to meet the climate goals. Then we have the second possibility or opportunity is for industry to move towards more renewable energy sources, and there we have probably 20 to 30% as well of the potential for emission reductions in industry. And then comes the role of technologies like carbon removal and others, which are at kind of infancy stages. Now, the challenge is kind of twofold. On one side, what we see is that the technologies we have today can only deliver 50% of the emission reductions that we need to achieve the climate goals, and we still need to invest as governments and as global community and private sector in innovations to deliver the remaining technologies that will bring us towards the climate goals. And actually, a lot of the technologies that are available now, like hydrogen, and which is quite a big topic at the moment, or CCUS, are very expensive technologies, and and also at the same time they have only been more put into pilots and have never been pushed towards more commercialization. And so we need to really focus our efforts then to work on bringing new technologies that support more electrification of heat processes in industry. We need to put more effort into deployment of those technologies like CCUS and hydrogen, and helping in bringing their costs down, as well as commercializing these. And at the same time, we need to accelerate the uptake of existing technologies and best practices like energy efficiency and renewable energy, which have been there for quite some time, but are unfortunately not yet disseminated at the rate that we need to achieve the climate goals. So how do we do that? How do we achieve that acceleration? How do we push for more implementation of energy efficiency, renewables, and all that? I would say, our recipe sort of is a 4-pillar recipe. First and foremost is actually more policies. Governments that have policies that set the right level playing field for all technologies. And this is where I'd like to say that, subsidies don't make it any easier for renewables, don't make it any easier for energy efficiency. And while renewables and energy efficiency have quite a lot of benefits other than just cost savings, or looking at the moment, the crisis worldwide, energy security is a very big, for example, driver that needs to be taken into account. For industries, energy saving allows them to be more competitive, more productive. So there's a lot of other benefits that are related to energy efficiency and renewables, but then we need to governments need to give a fair level playing field for all of these technologies. Also under policies, we see that more governments need to work on setting roadmaps that have clear milestones for how do they intend to, and also clear, not just milestones, but plans for achieving decarbonization in industrial and other sectors. And then giving the right incentives. One option, for example, that we are trying to look at is how green procurement, primarily by governments, can provide sort of security for market penetration for some of these technologies. The second pillar is actually related to skills, and this is where we see that we need to invest in improving the whole skills system, and providing more training and capacity building to help young people, women, and really all the experts in developing and emerging economies on identifying and better implementing measures related to energy efficiency and renewable energy. And then the third pillar is actually more related to the financing. I mean, there's financing as such perhaps is not the challenge, but it's the adequacy of some of these financing instruments for the needs of, for example, small and medium-sized enterprises or even micro-scale enterprises, which in many cases are actually enterprises that are owned as well by women and by young people. So we need to provide better financing instruments to cater for the needs of these enterprises, and at the same time promote energy efficiency and renewables. And then the fourth pillar is more awareness raising, and awareness raising of course comes at different levels. Awareness raising for governments, for public, as well as for the specialists or the experts that are working in the field, and helping them see more the opportunities and understand more around the challenges, and getting us really all aligned around the way forward. So perhaps, I mean, on an ending note, because I think I'm already exceeding probably my 12 minutes, but just on a final note, because one of the questions that was posed to me is how do women and youth also fit in all this? For sure, you know, when we talk about policies, this is what we try also to advocate for in UNIDO. We shouldn't talk about gender blind policies. You know, we need to ensure that gender and youth issues are integrated into these policies. When we talk about financing, the same thing. We need to really ensure that there are adequate financing instruments that tackle those needs. And similarly, you know, technologies, when we look into technology development, you know, taking in the perspectives of youth and taking in the perspectives of women in this technology development is also something that is essential. I really have great hopes and a lot of enthusiasm to see how youth are taking charge of you know, the future, and demanding more action from governments, from private sector, and I really hope that you know, with the inputs of everyone here, and also outside, you know, within the circles of SDG 7 youth constituency and others, that we can really work better on accelerating the energy transition, industrial transition, as well as our climate goals. Thanks a lot, Cherop, and I'll turn back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rana, for your take on the complexities on the industry sector and climate change, underlining the push towards energy efficiency and sustainable energy sources, and also innovation within the energy sector. So allow me to now welcome our final panelists for this session. We have Asma, the MENA Regional Manager with Gallup, United Nations Foundation. Asma has illustrated her passion in the development field, particularly the empowerment of vulnerable communities, and she has received multiple leadership recognitions for her work in this field. So I would like to welcome you, Asma. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cherop. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, wherever you're joining us from. So I'll quickly share my screen. So I'll be focusing more on the just and inclusive energy transition, especially from a youth perspective, and also as a young woman who has been trying to be active in this field. As we all know, climate and energy are really affecting the gender from different aspects. Sometimes it can be obvious for people, sometimes they are not really aware of that, but climate change does influence gender, and this is for me, from a personal experience that made me become active in the energy space. That in Tunisia, I was born and raised in a small town, and I saw how many of my classmates were suffering from the effects of extreme weather events and climate change, which made them drop out of school, get married at a very early age, and they weren't able to pursue their education. So each year I wouldn't see many of my classmates, and I would be like questioning why, what happened. Sometimes I would try to find them and ask them, and some they would say the school is too far, it's too cold in winter, so they're not like able to pursue their education and come to school. And that made me really sad. And when I started to grow older, and also I started to know more about energy and climate, I decided that I really want to work on this, because I believe in the power of the energy transition in changing girls' and women's lives and providing economic and social empowerment for them. So yeah, one of the effects of climate change on girls and women is that they miss their classes, they drop out of school. Also, there's a risk for them to be exposed to violence, especially in their homes, and also the risk of them getting married at an early age. So here we're talking about child marriage, and also the risk of death and injury during extreme weather events. So also there are other challenges that girls face, even if they are able to pursue their education, that they're not encouraged to in general pursue education in STEM fields, especially in renewable energy, due to different stereotypes that as girls, when they graduate, they wouldn't find a job in this field, and also they're not able to be performing as men, because sometimes like renewable energy jobs require like more physical abilities. So some people claim that women are not able to do that, which is not, of course, which is not true. And also that this like the job market, the renewable energy job market doesn't have enough opportunities. So this like hinders girls from pursuing their education in renewable energy, and this also shows the gap that we have in the energy sector, the gender gap. So I'll share maybe a bit about my experience and how I started like being active in the energy space. Academically, I have no relation to renewable energy. I studied business, and then I studied diplomacy. So it has nothing to do with energy, but I was like, in parallel with my studies, I decided that I really want to be part of the energy transition, because I believed in the power of energy in transforming girls' lives, and my life as well, and other youth in my country, Tunisia, and worldwide. So I started in 2017 by attending a boot camp with GIZ and Impact Hub Berlin, and I didn't know much about energy, but I had like so much passion that I really want to work on this, and I'm able to think about solutions, and I'm willing to work with people. So luckily, I was one of the winners, and I got the chance to go to Berlin to interact with entrepreneurs working in the sustainability world. And I learned a lot from them. And when I went back home to Tunisia, I became more encouraged, and I felt that yes, there's a potential in me, and there's like a great potential in this field as well. So it doesn't mean that I come from a small town in Tunisia that I'm not able to make a change or to like be part of the energy transition. So yeah, after that, I participated in the first IRENA Youth Forum, and that's where I got the chance to meet Cherub, Helen, and many other inspiring young energy leaders. And that also inspired me more. And with IRENA's support, we started more initiatives. And then I joined the SDG7 Youth Constituency as a regional focal point for the Arab states. And we started the Youth Sustainable Energy Hub, which is the global platform showcasing the work of young energy practitioners worldwide. So maybe to give you more about a background about the the SDG 7 youth constituency, which I personally, it was like the space for me that made me be able to have like more access to the energy space and the different stakeholders. So it's the formal engagement mechanism for young people in UN and UN-related processes, focus on energy topics, and we focus on youth engagement in the energy space. And maybe how we empower young people, we do this through 4 main areas: policy, advocacy, through engaging with different governmental and multi-stakeholders, also with the UN, through capacity building, organizing webinars, different workshops, and exchanging opportunities with young people. Also through youth action, showing the work that youth, what they're doing, mobilizing and supporting the different organizations and networks, and also through knowledge by drafting publications, also giving our input in the different important policy briefs or papers. And of course, we do this in collaboration with different organizations. One of them is Student Energy, of course, C4All, UNIDO, and different energy stakeholders. Sorry, my slides. It's okay, maybe I have an issue with the slides. So yeah, so what I really want to share today, that youth have a great potential, and for our attendees, you being like present today with us in this webinar, it shows that you are dedicated for this cause and you are passionate about the energy transition and climate change. So I'm personally happy to see this important number of young people being curious to hear us and to learn, and to also join like this cause. So I really encourage you like to continue this more, and to believe in yourselves, and also to keep like attending such events, and hopefully we would see more of you. Like we would see many young people attending COP and participating in the different negotiations. So let me just quickly share my screen again. Sorry. So yeah, maybe just like a few tips on how you can join. There are honestly many ways for us as young people to participate. We can attend conferences, workshops, we can write blogs and papers, we can start different projects, whether nonprofit or for profit. We should like follow what happens in our communities, our countries, our region. And globally, we can join different organizations. You can join Student Energy, you can join the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, you can take part in the different webinars and workshops that UNIDO, C4All, and different stakeholders are organizing. You can volunteer to support something related to climate and energy. Always try to follow the different UN updates, and maybe you can start your advocacy campaign related to climate change. And hopefully it would be great that you participate in COP and see like what happens, and like share your voice as a young person. So yeah, I'll try to maybe wrap it up here. So if you have like any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to connect with you. And also, I'll be happy if you join the SDG 7 Youth Constituency and continue your engagement. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Asma, for your insights on the gender intricacies that are hindering the achievement of gender equality and ultimately the energy transition, and also really for the tips on getting started as a young person to raise climate ambition. And without further ado, we will wrap up the panel session and we'll enter the second segment, which is the Q&A session. As Asma has reiterated, a lot of you are curious about what it is or what it entails to be part of the energy sector and how you can play a role in it. And this is your chance to ask the questions to the panelists who have wide experiences, and please take advantage of that. So we have had all the multifaceted perspectives from the panelists and would now love to turn to you, the audience, for this segment. Please feel free to direct any questions to them that you may have in the chat box. There are some that have already been answered, but without any sequence, I would like to dive and jump right into it. We have a question from Ayat Hassan, and they have directed the question to Tracy Crow, and they're asking, what is your assessment of carbon trading as a means to reduce emissions to address climate change?
Thank you, and it's a great question, and it's a very timely question for us at SE for All. We're actually just starting a major effort to try to scale the carbon market in Africa. And the reason why we want to do that is because we do see it as a critical way of channeling climate finance to developing countries for clean energy and carbon reduction. So we're seeing the voluntary carbon markets really growing over the last 5 years. I was just looking back at some of my notes for the work that we've been, the concept note that we've been developing for this. But it's grown about 50% just over the last 5 years, and I think it's exceeded $1 billion for the first time. So we're expecting to see even faster growth over the coming years. Unfortunately for Africa, though, Africa hasn't really been a big part of this yet, and we really think that there's a market there that's under realized. I think between 2002 and 2020, only about 14% of carbon credits came from African countries. There's huge opportunities to generate credits from projects including nature, cook stoves, renewables, landfill, efficiency, fossil fuel displacement, diesel genset displacements. So what we're going to be doing over the coming months, in particular leading up to COP27, is trying to create a roadmap for how we can scale carbon markets in Africa, at really focusing on how do we do that with quality credits that are permanent, additional, and measurable and verifiable. So we realize that there is a quality issue that has to be addressed. The additionality issue has to be addressed. But we think if we can contribute to actually scaling a viable, high quality carbon market, that can really be a game changer for getting climate finance towards clean energy projects in Africa.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and I hope the question was answered clearly. I know, yeah, like you said, it takes a while and we are pressed for time, but feel free to follow up with feel free to reach out to the panelists even after the webinar. So we have a wide range of questions that are centered on COP27, and as the webinar suggests, we are moving towards a COP27 and we would like youth engagement and youth participation. So Mohammed asked, how could we participate in COP27 this year? And I know this is a very broad topic, but I would like to fuse this question with a question from the anonymous attendee who is asking, what are the organizations and activities, especially in Egypt, that can aid us to participate in COP27? And maybe I can direct this to Asma because you had already started touching on this during your presentation in the segment.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So answering the question, so now I believe the application to attend COP is open. And what I have been seeing that there are many opportunities for young people to participate on fully funded basis in COP if you're not from Egypt. So I would highly encourage you to follow different like organizations on social media, especially on LinkedIn, to see these opportunities. So for us, if you join the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, you'll also be able to receive updates, because we have a working group for COP. We're trying to get budgets for youth delegates, and also funding opportunities for people who are not from Egypt, for young people who are not from Egypt to attend COP. So what I also encourage you is that you follow COP presidency website. I can share it with you the website if you don't know it. They share all updates there on how to join COP, and also how you can get accreditation, because you need to get accreditation in order for you to attend COP, and that you can get it through different like organizations, or even individually. If you, let's say, if you're not from Egypt, you are from another country, then you need to join the official delegation of your country, and you need to get accreditation from UNFCCC. So yeah, I'll share the website, because I saw people asking in the chat. But for more updates, as the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, we'll be sharing more about this. And also my colleague David, I think he's also attending the webinar. David is also one of the global focal points for the SDG 7 Youth Constituency, and he's working tirelessly on COP. So he can also maybe share with you here more updates in the chat. And also, we can share with you via email. Thank you.
Thanks, Asma. So we do have another question from Zayad, and I will direct this to Rana, but if any of the panelists feels like they want to add on the response, feel free to jump in. So the question asks, how can European countries overcome energy crisis because of the consequences of the Russian invasion to Ukraine through using eco-friendly sources of energy and taking into account at the same time the SDGs? And what strategy will be used to apply or to solve this problem?
A very difficult question, for sure. I think so. One of the lowest hanging fruits always is energy efficiency, to be fair. So, you know, investing in more efforts to promote energy efficiency. So one example I'll tell you about, which is at the moment in force, in fact, in Austria, where UNIDO is based, and also in Germany, is looking at the cooling systems and cooling and heating systems, and enforcing that, for example, in office buildings, that we have a higher temperature during the summer and a slightly lower temperature during winter. So because usually the temperature during winter is 20 degrees, I believe, and at the moment it's been reduced to 19 degrees. So for the heating, so that saves quite a lot of energy. And similarly, now in summer, it's set up to 22 instead of 21 degrees. And so, you know, this also saves quite a lot of energy. And it's enforced that in office buildings, you know, the heating and cooling is shut down at 5 o'clock. So these are like obviously very simple measures, but these are the most immediate measures that are being put in place in order to save energy. And of course, you know, I would only encourage that there would be more emphasis on giving now, like now is the time to invest in more renewable energy also, and ensure that we have more sources of renewable energy for our buildings and our homes. And so providing subsidies for end users that are interested in moving towards renewable energy sources, I think is for sure another quite important and useful tip. We see more countries also looking into investments in energy or hydrogen investments in Africa. You know, I think that is obviously also one possibility, but then, that needs to be, looked at beyond just like looking into securing the energy to come into Europe, but also how to use that as an opportunity to stimulate development and energy security in the countries where these projects are being developed. But yeah, I think that's perhaps quite a complex question and requires a lot more thought. But these are just few quick thoughts from my side. Thanks, Chirop.
Thank you, Rana. So we also have another question from Alza Bidi, and they ask, how can we as young people from the Middle East contribute to the development of solutions to the gas and oil leaks that have caused by the oil reducing companies in our regions, and how can we contribute to addressing those problems that they cause and holding companies that do not adhere to environmental standards and do not care about climate changes that occur because of them. And they are from Yemen. So if anyone would like to take that one, please feel free to take a stab.
I can take that, Sheriff, if you want. Yes, especially as someone from the MENA region, I totally understand how sometimes it is challenging to especially convince like certain companies and for-profits to go green and to also avoid like using fossil fuel. But as a young person, what I would encourage you to do is to maybe do more of like youth-led work, which means like you can start a youth organization and start advocacy with like fellow peers, like fellow young people from the MENA region, which honestly, we don't have like many of such networks and organizations in our region. So it would be great that maybe you can collaborate with other young people from the MENA region through this webinar or other initiatives, and you start a campaign. You can start a campaign, you can start an organization, you can start a project on how you can push more into advocating for this and also encouraging these companies, which might not be very easy. Another tip is maybe you can also focus on more like global advocacy, so that you can through that influence the regional things that are happening in MENA or the Arab region in general. This is what I personally found like easier, because it wasn't easy for me to access or to maybe advocate at a national level or a regional level. But when I started becoming more active globally then, and having more like visibility and credibility at the global level, I was also then able to have access to a regional network and be able to influence a bit what's happening in the region. So I believe I know it's a bit hard, but it's not impossible, and you can do it. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Asma. So the next question I had is really not from the Q&A, but it's something that I thought maybe Ms. Tracy Crow would touch on. And the question is there really the need of increasing the number of energy compacts, or is it drawing away the attention from the large levers in the global energy transition, namely the rapid expansion of renewable and the increase in ambition for NDCs and their compliance?
It's a great question. Yes, is the short answer. Yes, we need more energy compacts. SE4O was the organization that spearheaded the whole idea behind these energy compacts. And this was something that we developed as a key outcome from the high-level dialogue on energy that took place during the UN General Assembly in 2021. And there was a reason why we were pushing to do energy compacts. And your question about, but we have NDCs, is this distracting from NDCs? Is it overlapping with NDCs? NDCs aren't particular to energy. And that's what we saw a huge need for. We wanted to see commitments and actions that were specific to energy, specific to achieving SDG 7 and energy transition. So that's why we developed these energy compacts. We had about 200 submitted leading up to and during the high-level dialogue on energy last year. We've continued to have more come in. We want to see more. I think we had, and the energy compacts can come from governments, they can come from companies, they can come from international organizations. From governments, I think we had about 38, 40 or so compacts. If you think of how many countries there are in the world, that's not that many. So we would really want to see many more countries making this public commitment, identifying the actions they can take, making a public commitment towards achieving SDG 7 if they're an energy access deficit country. If they're not an energy access deficit country, if they're a developed country, then we still want them to make that commitment to helping countries achieve universal access. So we do think it's really important. We think it's complementary to the NDCs. One thing that we're doing now for some of the countries that submitted the energy compacts is taking what's in those energy compacts, comparing them to the NDCs and working with countries to try to actually increase the ambition in their NDCs based on the energy compacts. So that's how we see this happening. So we think more energy compacts is great. And then now what we also want to see is actions coming out of those compacts. So commitments are great. Lots and lots of commitments. It's action. We are running out of time. We need action. So what we are doing now is trying to match make between the commitments in those compacts and the needs that are identified in those compacts. So if a country has identified that it's got an energy access gap and they need support, then we're trying to match make out of a compact, a country, a company, whatever it may be, that's committed support towards energy access. So we're trying to match make. We're tracking those commitments. So we're actually in the process now of looking at the commitments from last year. What was the progress made? So these weren't just something, somebody did a compact, they submitted it to the UN, it's all done. We're tracking. Every year we're going to be tracking, and we're going to be doing our best to hold them account to those commitments. They are voluntary commitments, but they're publicly accessible. We will advertise those that don't meet their commitments, really push for them to meet commitments. But yeah, we do think it's important that we have them. We think it's important to have more. And now we think it's important to follow up on the commitments that are in those energy compacts.
Yeah, speaking of commitments, there are many commitments that have put forward innovation and taking advantage of technology. So I would like to pose this question to Rana. There are many key technologies for the industrial decarbonization in, say, the steel, chemistry, cement production that are not yet ready for the market. And only through investments and massive sum of investments and strategies will we be able to reduce the cost, because the sooner piloting and demonstrated plants are built, the better. So how can we accelerate this process, especially in industrialized countries?
Thanks, Cherub. Very pertinent question. So the main the main point that we are trying to advocate for is that we need to build demand for the products, so for green steel, for green cement, so that we drive the adoption of these technologies. And so how do we build that demand? One option that is being promoted globally is global procurement. So we have coalitions such as the First Movers Coalition, which is more of a private sector commitment platform where companies commit to buying green steel, for example. So Volvo, as a car manufacturer that requires steel for manufacturing of its cars, sort of commits to buying green steel or near zero steel for their car manufacturing. So this is something that's being coordinated by the World Economic Forum and the Special Envoy on Climate Change, Secretary John Kerry from the US. On the other side, we as UNIDO are trying to coordinate government action to promote public procurement and green public procurement. So why is that? It's actually because governments are responsible for 40% of the demand for green steel for public construction projects. So procurement of governments is responsible for 40% of the steel market and 25% of the cement and concrete market. So that can be a very powerful lever to give the market the signal to transform. And so we will be at the end of the month of September in Pittsburgh at the Clean Energy Ministerial announcing a pledge that we are inviting countries to commit to look into the procurement of green steel and green cement and concrete for public construction projects. And there, of course, the definition of what low carbon steel and low carbon cement to a certain extent is following also the IEA's recommendation. And then on the other side as well, because we want to make sure we stimulate innovation and not only deployment, the other level of the pledge is actually for governments to commit towards procurement of near zero steel and near zero cement and concrete for signature projects. And so this is what we will be working with governments on to make commitments and pledges towards these targets. And we hope that within the course of next year, we will be able to bring at least 10 countries to be part of this commitment. Thanks, Sharab.
Thanks so much, Shona, and we'll keep an eye on the pledge towards the government projects and targets. And speaking of projects, I would like to bring it down to more the grassroots level, because from the Q&A, I see a lot of interest from the young people seeking to ask how they can get funding or how they can participate in COP27. And this is a recurring question that keeps on coming up over and over again. So to Asma, would you highlight from your work and experience, what are your reflections of the voice of the youth and marginalized groups? Are their demands being taken seriously and taken into account by the policymakers or the decision makers?
It's a tough question, but yeah, it's a very important matter. I wouldn't say yes or no that the voice of like marginalized youth is heard, and because I personally I was one of the marginalized youth in my town in Tunisia, and we didn't have access to any opportunities, we only had like access to basic facilities, and I didn't know what's like happening in the capital, Tunis, what's happening in my region and what's happening globally, and how other young people are building themselves and advocating. So I believe, yes, more like focus should be put on these like young people, because it's not their fault that they don't have like access to these facilities and these opportunities, and it makes it harder for them when they, for example, go for your university in another city that is like more populated, that youth had more opportunities in that city. And also I believe like countries should have access to equal opportunities for their people, like, and especially for us as young people, because when our governments, they invest in them, in us, they are investing in our future and their future and the future of our countries and our regions and our world. So more focus should be given for youth. And sometimes like if we don't have like the opportunities, maybe as young people, we should be the ones creating them. So this is something that I try to focus on from a younger age, that even if the opportunity is not available for me, I'll try my best to create this opportunity. So also try your best to see how you can collaborate with other young people, try to see how you can approach these decision makers, try to see how you convince these companies, how you can raise money, raise funds, especially I know when you are a student, it's a bit hard that you would have like financial independence, but try your best, because there are ways, and you just like need to like have the dedication that things can happen. So always like believe in yourself, and that this change can happen, because sometimes you cannot only wait for government to be the ones making the change. Youth should step up and also be the ones taking the lead for their own future.
Thank you, Asma. And we are slowly coming to the end of the Q&A session, but I would quickly like to turn to the panelists in 30 seconds. Please give us your opinion within your area of interest and expertise and beyond. What is the main area of action for young people to impact the energy transition positively as we wrap up? And I'd like to start with Ms. Tracy Crow, then move to Rana, and finally Asma.
Great question. Two things: be a voice for a just and equitable energy transition, and remember the just and equitable part, and energy access is part of that. And the second thing is work in the energy sector. We need more young people. We need more women, certainly. And when I say energy sector, I also mean government. So don't be afraid of going into government. Remember that that's where policy making happens. So we really need those voices in government as well as in private sector working on energy.
Yeah, fully concur with Tracy's final recommendations. So get involved both by being an advocate for change through all these different global processes as well as locally, and then get involved also in coming up with solutions. I mean, I find it very inspiring to look at, just this morning I was seeing actually Drop Access, Nora Magero from Kenya, getting an award for being one of the greatest startups. So youth can also bring quite a lot of the solutions that we need for decarbonizing our energy systems and achieving our climate goals, and coming up with solutions that are fit for also our local context. So, because it is quite different from one country to the other, from one region to the other. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Asma, do you have your last call to action on?
Yeah, I would highly encourage the attendees and youth in general to start like different projects. For example, the Sustainable Energy Hub. When we first started, we had like 200 projects applying, and we selected 90 projects. So that there are like resources that we can still use. So I highly encourage you that even if you don't have the background, the technical background in energy, that you can maybe start things related to capacity building, to knowledge, to advocacy. So yeah, I highly encourage you. It's just like about starting something, and step by step that project will grow, and also with small impacts we can have like the whole stake. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the questions. We are now at the tail end of our agenda and would like to invite Sergio Mitana, the Executive Director of the Climate Parliament, to provide us with a summary and the closing remarks. Sergio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cherub. I hope you can hear me. You can hear me well. I've been asked to say a few final words, and in a way, the last few interventions from the panelists describing in a few seconds what the main actions would be are a very, very good summary. As Cherub was saying, my name is Sergio Misana. I'm the Executive Director of the Climate Parliament. The Climate Parliament is a global network of parliamentarians, of members of Congress and Parliament working on climate and trying to advance the transition to renewable energy as fast as we can. So our constituency is parliamentarians. We give a lot of priority to women parliamentarians and of course young legislators as well. One thing that I would perhaps add to the discussion is the fact that climate has a generational justice dimension, and this has been discussed quite a lot. I mean, there's basically a tension between the fact that emissions that are being put into the atmosphere today will stay there for years and decades. So it's a long-term process that has been going on for a long time and will continue to go on even if we take very, very drastic action now. But at the same time, the window of opportunity to take action is now, and it's rapidly closing if we listen to the scientific community. If we listen to what the scientists are saying in terms of our rapidly shrinking carbon budget. So within that tension, young people are the voice and have been the voice of urgency for sure. And this conversation also has highlighted many dimensions of the energy transition, including youth and gender, of course, and justice and others. But at the same time, it's important to keep in mind that even though renewable energy is growing, it's not replacing fossil fuels. It's actually meeting growing demand. And that is what we need to do. We need to replace fossil fuel entirely at a very, very ambitious scale and at a very, very rapid pace. And again, youth movements and leaders have a key role to play in this in terms of instilling that sense of urgency. I went to some of the protests that young people organized in Glasgow outside of the COP, and there you've really had a sense of that urgency. But at the same time, I think this webinar and this process of engagement of young leaders in the process of the COP is also very important. So putting pressure from outside and being to some extent critical of the whole process, but at the same time engaging is very important. Ultimately, I would say that what we're pushing for is the change in the zeitgeist, a change of what we consider to be common sense with regards to these issues. And some people speak of transitioning to a war economy mentality. Basically, this transition should not be a priority among many, but it should be in some ways the priority if we are going to save civilization from catastrophe. So it's been a very rich discussion. It's been long, and I would like to just say very quick words. Thank Helen for setting the scene for the discussion. Dibujo, I'm just going to highlight things in a non-systematic way. I was taking what you said about fossil fuels, but also about overlap between mitigation and adaptation, the emphasis you placed on green jobs, which Helen had also emphasized, and also the role of certain tools that are readily available to young people like social media. Tracy, thank you so much for a very comprehensive description of what Sustainable Energy for All is doing, and also during the Q&A session, you spoke about so many things that are not impossible to summarize, but I would highlight the need that you were mentioning about the need to redefine or rethink what access is in quantitative terms, and the fact that we need to increase energy demand as part of energy access. So thank you again for that. Rana, I was stricken by the description of industry as at the same time the bad guy, the victim, and the hero, and some of the solutions that you mentioned, including energy efficiency, and of course the uptake of renewable energy. We will be discussing some of those issues more in depth in the next webinar. And then Asma, thank you so much for your eloquent words about gender inequality in the specific context of Tunisia, but also when it comes to the impact of climate change on girls and women, and also the idea of believing in yourselves, and also the sort of menu of options that you have given in terms of how to take part, and you have already come back to that during the Q&A session. If I might say something about the war in Ukraine, again, it's staggering that we have such a huge energy crisis that has been brought by fossil fuels, and still that mentality, that zeitgeist, is not changing into solutions like, for instance, desert power, carrying power from deserts in Northern Africa and other parts to Europe via undersea cables, with a fast transition to renewable energy. Cheryl, before reverting back to you, I just would like to invite everybody to register for the next webinar on the series. It's going to be on Thursday, September 8th, and it's toward COP, innovation and entrepreneurship as catalysts for climate action. But having said that, Cheryl, I would like to give the floor back to you. And again, thank you so much for everybody who's joined this very important and interesting conversation.
Thank you for the closing remarks, Sergio. And it's a wrap for the second webinar. As Sergio has mentioned, we will see you in early September and speak soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.